Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have a great show for you today, so be sure to hit that like button because that helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. We are going to talk about Trump, Epstein, Israel, and Piers Morgan, and what these ignominious figures all have in common. It's not just about a scandal or a controversy around a sex ring or anything like this. It's about a lot more. It's about who is protecting who is protecting what, and why these networks of thieves and predators have gone so far to cover all of this up. Our first guest has been furiously digging into all of this and is here now to expose it all. It is friend of the show, a renowned internationally hip-hop artist, as well as journalist and host of the Watchdog on Min Press News. Lowkey, good to see you.
Hi, Danny. Thank you for having me today. It's great to be here.
Of course. Well, how about we get started? I mean, the latest news in the Jeffrey Epstein saga has a lot to do with these troves of files that the Trump administration has suppressed, but the FBI has supposedly been furiously redacting his name from. But I wanted your assessment of the overall situation, the connections, the links. I know you have been digging into this deeply, so I'm just going to let you have at it.
First, I'm going to start with what we do know about Donald Trump and his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Then I'm going to get into who Jeffrey Epstein was, in the words of his closest friends, allies, and confidants. And thirdly, I'm going to circle back to the way in which Donald Trump may be related to all of this. So to start with, we know that Epstein had 14 different numbers for Donald Trump in his little black book, which was not so little in the end. We also know that Trump traveled seven separate times on Epstein's planes. But also something that has been left out of a lot of the mainstream coverage of this issue is Jeffrey Epstein's butler, Alfredo Rodriguez, first attempted to make known the contents of the Black Book in 2015. Now, at that time, Rodriguez claimed that he had circled what were either material witnesses or co-conspirators with Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking compromat building program. Now, one of the names that he circled was, of course, Donald Trump. So what that leads us to see is that the fear is not so much necessarily that Trump was entrapped by Epstein, but that perhaps Trump was involved in the program. And what exactly was that program? So let's look at the trajectory of Jeffrey Epstein's work. So initially, he was employed by Donald Barr at the Dalton School. Despite not having a degree in mathematics, he was appointed there as a maths teacher. Now, previously, Donald Barr had worked at the Office of Strategic Services. Now, that is the well-known precursor to the CIA. And it's actually been said that just before Donald Barr hired Epstein, he had written a sci-fi novel about human trafficking and sex slavery. Now, not long after that, the Evening Standard reported that Epstein claimed he was working for the CIA at that time. And it wasn't until 1987 that Epstein became connected to well-known Israel lobbyist Leslie Wexner. Now, Wexner was the head of Victoria's Secret, the famous lingerie company, and Wexner funds something called the Wexner Israel Fellowship at Harvard, which is part of the Center for Public Leadership. Now, this fellowship aims to provide Israel's next generation of public leaders with what they call superlative training in public management and leadership development. Now, several very key figures in Israeli intelligence have studied using this fellowship. And in addition to that, Israel actually listed the Wexner Foundation on a list of public sector reserve programs organized directly by the Israeli Prime Minister's office. And Wexner's properties were used by Epstein for a lot of these entrapment and compromat building operations. But then the next interesting turn in what happens with Epstein is the death of Robert Maxwell. Now, Robert Maxwell was an MP in this country. He was also the owner of the Daily Mirror newspaper. Now, according to Seymour Hersh, Maxwell was an agent of Israeli intelligence, and he was involved in the well-known Promise software scandal. Now, this was the selling of software to the United States to use on important classified databases, which contained a backdoor for Israel's intelligence agencies to access. So there was a massive fallout from the purchase of this Promise software. And the very same year that Maxwell died in 1991, the key journalist Danny Casolaro, who was looking into it, also died. Now, at his funeral, Maxwell received all of the largesse of the Zionist entity. Several former Israeli presidents, many former heads of Israeli intelligence were all in attendance. And what came out of that was his daughter Ghislaine Maxwell actually moved to New York and began a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, according to Stephen Hoffenberg, who was Epstein's business partner, mentor, cohort at the time, Epstein began to boast about, through Ghislaine Maxwell, becoming part of this deal with Israel's military intelligence, whereby he would sell secrets of individuals to them. And this, Hoffenberg claimed, also was in reference to Prince Andrew, the famous British monarch in this country, who, you know, the son of the Queen of England, Elizabeth. And so what's interesting here is that not only do you have this relationship between Epstein and Israel's intelligence agencies, but now you are looking at the other figures who were circled by Alfredo Rodriguez in this black book. Leslie Wexner was also circled as a material witness or a co-conspirator. Jean-Luc Burnell was also circled. Now, Jean-Luc Burnell is somebody that was pictured on Epstein's island with a hat that said Israeli army on it, and he later died in prison. And so when considering that recently a birthday letter was shown to the Wall Street Journal, in which Donald Trump is believed to have sent his birthday wishes to Jeffrey Epstein, saying, "May every day be a wonderful secret." And even Donald Trump supposedly drawing the picture of a naked woman and signing his name across the navel. In 2002, Trump gave an interview to New York Magazine about Jeffrey Epstein. He said the following: "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life." Now, a neutral bystander could see this as indicating some knowledge of the crimes that Epstein was later charged and convicted of. You also have to remember that Ehud Barak, who's not only the former Israeli prime minister, but also the former head of military intelligence, a man which it is alleged that Epstein was feeding information to, he met with Epstein 30 times between 2013 and 2017. He had significant business interests with this individual. All of that was post Epstein's conviction for pedophilia. You also have to remember that when Alex Acosta was asked what happened with Epstein, this was the Attorney General at the time when Epstein got his sweetheart deal that Dershowitz was able to obtain for him, which essentially saw him serving no time in prison for the crime of pedophilia. Alex Acosta said, "I was told he belonged to intelligence, so therefore I should not touch him." But what you also have to remember is that later on, the other Attorney General that was tasked with investigating Epstein was actually Bill Barr. And who was Bill Barr? He was the son of Donald Barr, the first person that employed Epstein at the school and had him teaching mathematics. Bill Barr himself was also former CIA. So all of these questions are coming to light. You also have to remember that Trump recently, in the last few days, actually admitted that several of the women that were recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell for Epstein actually were Trump employees. So Virginia Giuffre, who died recently and actually is the most famous Epstein victim, who also claims that Alan Dershowitz had sex with her at least 6 times. She originally was an employee of Donald Trump, and she was taken by Ghislaine Maxwell and then recruited for Epstein and his trafficking purposes. So there's many questions here about what exactly was the nature of Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein. You also have to remember that Mark Epstein, the brother of Jeffrey, is certain that what was carried out in the first Trump term of presidency, when Epstein is alleged to have died in prison, Mark Epstein claims that it was a professional hit. And he says as much by saying that the 2 pathologists that were charged with delivering an autopsy on the body of Jeffrey Epstein said they could not conclude that this was a suicide because of the nature of his injuries. Also, some of this footage was put out recently, and it was clear from the metadata that it had actually been edited. And even the footage itself was focused on a part of the tier which was quite far from Epstein's cell. So there's many question marks coming up on a daily basis around this stuff. But what you also have to think about is that during the time when Epstein was clearly targeting Bill Clinton, US president, you had some decisions made by Clinton that do make you wonder. So, for instance, Jonathan Pollard, who is the well-known Israeli spy who was able to steal millions of US military secrets and give them to the Israelis, he was a naval intelligence officer, was imprisoned in the United States to decades in jail. During Clinton's term, he is reported to have been approached by Benjamin Netanyahu, and Netanyahu made clear to him that through the hacking of the phone in the Oval Office, the Israelis had access to information about Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. At which point, Clinton approaches figures in the CIA and says he's newly convinced of the argument to release and pardon Jonathan Pollard. At that point, there is actually a rebellion within the US intelligence community, and several high-ranking figures threaten to resign if Clinton goes ahead with that, and he doesn't get the release of Pollard. But what does happen? Well, Mark Rich and Pincus Green, who were 2 what are known as Sayanim in Israeli intelligence lexicon. These are individuals who are businessmen that start businesses which on the face of it have nothing to do with Israel, but are in actuality being used for Israeli intelligence purposes. So Mark Rich ran a logistics company in the Middle East, which was able to procure a huge amount of information about Iraq, which supposedly, according to the Israelis, benefited them greatly in the war in 1991, in the Gulf War, when Iraq struck Israel with rockets. And that came out because the Israeli government put pressure on Bill Clinton to pardon both Mark Rich and Pincus Green. They had incurred federal charges in the United States for tax evasion, supposedly ripping off US taxpayers for $48 million. And they fled to Israel and were on the FBI's most wanted list. Now, before Clinton stepped down as president, he actually pardoned these individuals. But that was following a massive campaign by figures like Ehud Barak, a letter signed by several high-ranking Israeli intelligence figures, and Barak himself. So the question has to be asked here, what actually did Epstein get through the Compromat building project? Number one, this is a scandal which is bipartisan, actually. It's not particularly exceptional in the history of these type of operations. They've happened across different societies, across different civilizations, across different forms of government. But we are seeing a bipartisan effort to silence the truth of this story that so many people in the United States want to know more about. And what's certain is Donald Trump is not telling the truth about the true extent of his dealings with Jeffrey Epstein. What will be the next step? I am unsure. I think they are continuing to try and drip feed the public with little bits of information, just enough, they think, to try and satisfy the public appetite for truth, but just enough also to just not enough to essentially conceal the wider story that has been at work here. And many people, including Alfredo Rodriguez, have died along the way, trying to get some form of the truth out there. So it will be interesting to see what turn all of this takes next, and what exactly Epstein was able to extract from his targets. Of course, it has now come out that it's widely believed that Ghislaine Maxwell actually leaked that birthday letter to the Wall Street Journal in order to put pressure on Trump to pardon her. Whether that is true, it remains to be seen, and it will be interesting to see what the next steps are. But Trump is definitely uncomfortable with this entire Epstein fiasco. And also, you have to remember that for Elon Musk to come out and say Trump is in the Epstein files, Elon Musk is not simply a supporter of Trump or someone who was in his administration. Elon Musk is the top funder of Donald Trump. I have studied forensically the funders of Donald Trump, and the one who gave the most was Elon Musk. He gave $120 million. So for him to come out and say this is a really significant assertion by him. So where this story goes, I'm not sure, but people really should follow it quite closely, because there's a lot of truth about the way our civilization and society has actually been shaped over the last few decades, isn't it?
Yeah, and perhaps we can get to this because, as you know, Lowkey, while Donald Trump is the center of this, this is certainly a huge nexus of connections that deal with the entire system. But Donald Trump himself has been willing to essentially tank his administration. He campaigned on the so-called truth about the matter on all of this. And then we've also seen his dealings in West Asia have been absolutely to the benefit of Israel, whether we're talking about the 12-day war with Iran, the ongoing genocide, the attempt, which was a failure, to destroy Ansarallah in Yemen. It goes on and on and on, but all of this definitely is connected to Israel. So how do you see the impact of all of this, not just on Donald Trump, but the overall trajectory of U.S. and Western foreign policy?
Well, many say that all U.S. presidents have a special connection to Israel. And it's not untrue, though there has never been a US president that, in terms of actual structural relationship, is as deeply locked in with the Israel lobby as Donald Trump is factually. Not only him taking the insane step to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel, but also that was something that was on the table for consecutive US presidents, but they never saw fit to do it because they saw it as such an incendiary act. But Donald Trump had the courage and the fortitude, I guess, to take such a move. But then when you actually look down the list of his funders, many people, they focused on Miriam Adelson. So she is the widow of Sheldon Adelson. This was, of course, the individual that was able to get the CIA directly into the Ecuadorian embassy to spy on Julian Assange. It was through Sheldon Adelson that took place. But Sheldon Adelson is also the largest funder of Israeli settlements in the history of the settler movement in the West Bank. But it's far bigger than the Adelsons, actually. Another key funder is Isaac Perlmutter. Now, Isaac Perlmutter is a former Israeli soldier. He used to have a big position at Marvel Entertainment. He was the chairman of it. And his wife was also very close to Trump, even attending his inauguration. Perlmutter previously was referred to as the shadow head of military veteran affairs. For his close advisory role to Trump. He's funded the Friends of the IDF, the ADL, the Jewish Agency for Israel, as well as illegal settlements in the West Bank. But you had other key funders of Trump that have been less emphasized that are deeply locked in to Israel's program. For instance, Richard Uline, who is the individual that funded the Accuracy in Media organization, which doxed pro-Palestinian students and literally put their faces on trucks and billboards across the United States to try and intimidate them into silence. Another source of funding for the Trump campaign came from a company called Crown Quest, which is headed by Tim Dunn, who simultaneously is the chairman of the Christian Advisory Board of the Israel Allies Foundation. Another key financial backer of Donald Trump is Standard Industries. Now, that's a project of David Millstone, who heads something called the Tech Aviv Founders Club. It describes itself as a private global network of Israeli technology company founders and top-tier investors that harness our collective knowledge and networks to help each other build better companies. Now, the organization works so closely with Israeli intelligence figures like Nadav Zafrir, who was a former commander of the Signals Intelligence Unit 8200 in the Israeli military. Another interesting source of funding here, which actually circles back to the Epstein story, is the investment firm Andreessen Horowitz. So that funds Donald Trump, but also it invests greatly in Israeli companies. So Andreessen Horowitz funded many Israeli ventures like Wiz, which was recently procured by Google and was founded by Asaf Rapoport, a former officer in Unit 8200. But moreover, Andreessen Horowitz funds an Israeli cyber defense startup by the name of Toka. Now, this was founded by Ehud Barak. Now, what Toka claims it can do is literally hack people's fridges and different contraptions in their home in order to spy on them. So it's quite incredible. And actually, the depth of funding for Trump is even further than that. So, for instance, you have the Elliott Management organization, which is well known to be the brainchild and instrument of Paul E. Singer. Now, Paul E. Singer not only funds Birthright, he also funds the Israeli military and funds the building of settlements in the West Bank. He's also responsible for setting up something called the Startup Nation Central initiative alongside key Netanyahu loyalists. Now, that has systematically fed former agents of Unit 8200 into big tech companies like Google and others. So with Donald Trump, it's not so much a question of which of Trump's funders are key Zionist actors and lobbyists. It's which of Trump's funders are not part of the Israel lobby. And literally, I would say 95% of the funds that have gone to Donald Trump in this presidential campaign have come from individuals who are also simultaneously deeply invested in the further colonization of Palestine, and in many cases also funding the Israeli military directly. So that really is where we are. And that actually accounts for some of the decisions that Trump has made. Of course, it's also worth mentioning that he did draw down on Iran, and he did not go the whole way the way Netanyahu wanted him to do. What Netanyahu has really done so well with Trump is put Israeli policies with Trump's stamp. And Trump's been willing to do that. So, for instance, when the Israelis want to completely depopulate Gaza of Palestinians, rather than them saying this is the Netanyahu plan for Gaza, they're able to get Trump to say this is the Trump plan for Gaza. It's incredible. But of course, Trump is also quite sensitive to public perception. And because it received such a massive backlash, it's unclear how deeply personally and emotionally invested he is in the idea of depopulating Gaza of Palestinians. And even when he tries to explain it, he tries to couch it in this kind of anti-war, cryptic anti-war way. But ultimately, he is showing himself to be pliant in many different ways. With the case of Iran, it's important to remember that there was a blackout across the Zionist entity on what Iran was doing. Iran struck and destroyed 11,000 buildings in Israel. And that's according to the Israeli statistics themselves. They literally damaged 33,000 buildings. A third of those had to be pulled down afterwards. You had over 41,000 claims for compensation from Israelis after the war with Iran, leading us to believe that Iran did a lot more damage than Israel is willing to admit. You have to remember that in the immediacy of the war between Iran and Israel, there was a 700% increase in cyber attacks against Israel. For instance, the group by the name Arabian Ghost shut down Israeli radio stations, and even the website of Israel's external agency, intelligence agency, Mossad, was also brought down. And Iran also struck Mossad's HQ during this war. You also know that the Bazan Group facilities in Haifa, which the Bazan Group is responsible for 65% of Israel's diesel fuel for transportation, 59% of its gasoline, and 52% of its kerosene for jet fueling. Well, Iran struck their facilities in Haifa, and that had a massive effect. You also saw Iran single-handedly cause Israel's gas crisis, which forced it to stop gas exports to regimes in Egypt and Jordan. It really got to the point where the Israeli tax authority director, Shai Aharonovich, actually attested to the extent of this paralysis by saying at a press conference, "These are challenges of a magnitude we have never faced in the history of Israel." Even Amir Dahan, the head of the Israeli tax authority compensation department, said there has never been this level of damage before. And all of this led to a mental health crisis within Israel, with an estimated 3 million Israelis officially suffering from trauma and an increase in the consumption of psychiatric drugs by 300%. So really, Israel was its only choice in that war was for the United States to save it by getting a ceasefire, or save it more permanently by actually going the whole way and overthrowing the government in Iran. Now, Donald Trump did not have the minerals for that at that time. And that's significant because even with all of this investment, which I have outlined in this interview so far, Trump was still not far enough over the line to overthrow the only state in the world which materially supports the divine right of the Palestinians to armed resistance. And that material support has been billions and billions of dollars worth of funding and supplies to the Palestinian resistance factions, and training and support for them in any way they want. So with all of that, Israel still was not able to achieve its objective against Iran. And ultimately, Iran was victorious over Israel in that war.
Yeah, and the consequences to Lowkey, before we move on, of the Epstein saga appear to be quite grand, just in the scheme of not only has the Trump administration had quite difficulties managing West Asia in particular, but also it has now been exposed as even more deeply connected to Israel than they wanted to let on. And you mentioned how Trump is indeed deeper in with the Israeli lobby than perhaps anyone else in the history of the United States. And now that is bearing consequences just on the face of how Trump has handled this saga up until this point.
Well, of course, Danny, as you well know, any human being with a pulse, with a heart, with a functioning form of empathy would have a natural aversion to seeing the suffering of children, the enforced starvation, the killing of people on an industrial scale with the most technologically advanced military tools known to humanity. That a huge portion of Trump's support base, they call the MAGA base, is deeply opposed to Israel. And actually now it's becoming a make or break issue for their support of Donald Trump. So going from an advantage when coming into just US politics in general, Trump's existing links to Israel lobbyists and individuals linked to Israeli intelligence, that was an advantage. Trump had that as an advantage over his opponents. Now it is the ultimate liability and vulnerability. And actually, Danny, as you know, in the years to come, the roles that people have played during this time will be something that not only their children, but their children's children will look back on and take note of and bear some form of shame for this. And so Donald Trump is deeply, deeply entrenched within this nexus of, yes, the trilateral security state, which has the Israelis and the US security services, but the US security state has never been fully at ease with Donald Trump. They view him as erratic. They view him as ultimately untrustworthy, whereas the Israelis have always viewed him as trustworthy. But now he's in a situation where you have a large percentage of US citizens saying they do not support Israel's military actions in Gaza, a large percentage of Trump supporters saying they cannot justify his positions in terms of Israel. So in a way, he's between a rock and a hard place. How does he sell this servility to Israel in this way to his support base, which has been fed the mantra of America first ad infinitum? He has repeated these slogans which echo in people's minds, where they simply do not match up to what he's doing in terms of Israel. And ultimately, I think he will pay some form of price in reputational damage, at very least, on this issue.
Yeah. And it seems like it could very well have electoral damage in the very near future. Lowkey, I wanted to now get to another issue you brought to my attention, and that is the British media mogul and champion of free speech, as he calls himself, Piers Morgan. He has had you on his show several times. Now, however, it appears Piers Morgan is going after you in a big way. And I wanted to pull up just some of that, because he has actually threatened your arrest. After you said that Piers Morgan has been a propagandist for the genocide in Gaza, he says, wow, it appears low-key appears to be suggesting I should be executed like the Nazis were after Nuremberg because I am a propagandist of the Zionist genocide in Gaza. And now you have actually challenged him on this, Lowkey. And here is how he responded to you. No, this is, so you responded here. You use the phrase appears to be suggesting because you know full well I am not actually calling for violence against you. And he goes, no, you inferred I should be executed like the Nazis after Nuremberg. So, Lowkey, what is going on here? Talk about this, because you and Piers Morgan have had this kind of relationship for a while, but he has gone so far to reportedly report you to law enforcement agencies.
Well, so first, let's break down who Piers Morgan is as a journalist, what his connections are to key Israel lobbyists. He's somebody that has a history of working with a charity headed by Trevor Chin and Lord Mendelsohn. Lord Mendelsohn was the former head of the Labour Friends of Israel, who also did PR work for Rupert Murdoch and lobbying work for Rupert Murdoch. But also Trevor Chin is really the arch officer of the Israel lobby in this country. So Morgan clearly has a personal relationship with these people. He was pictured early on in the genocide having dinner with the wife of Jonathan Mendelsohn. It seems he's a friend of the family. But he was employed throughout the genocide until January 2025 by Rupert Murdoch. Now, according to Benjamin Netanyahu in his book, Bibi, My Story, this is what he says about Rupert Murdoch. He said, Rupert Murdoch became a close friend to both me and Israel. He was always a staunch and unflinching supporter of Israel and viewed it, as I did, as the foundation stone of the free world in the Middle East. Israel has not had a better friend. So this was the employer of Piers Morgan throughout this war until 2025 this year. Now, I have studied the Hasbara guidebook by the Israel Project, released in 2009, and it breaks down how to deal with the issue of Hamas. And it is almost verbatim been reproduced in the way that Piers Morgan has interviewed supporters of the Palestinian cause. So myself included, we have been asked ad nauseum, literally over the course of the genocide. I would say he's probably asked the question over 100 times, maybe hundreds of times. Do you condemn Hamas? It's been considered a condition almost for him to give you the respect of a normal, empathetic human being. Now, that is literally a reproduction, as far as I see it, in what is contained in the Hasbara, which is the Hebrew word, Hasbara, the Hebrew word for propaganda, the manual produced by the Israel Project in 2009. I don't believe that he organically has this curiosity about, do you condemn Hamas? I believe that is a playbook and a talking point that has come from somebody linked into this infrastructure. Now, Rupert Murdoch is not somebody who just is a supporter of Israel of his own volition. He's also folded into all of that. So Murdoch had something called the NDS Group, which was an Israeli company owned by him, which was staffed entirely by former Israeli military and former Israeli intelligence personnel, including the former deputy director of the Shin Bet, which is Israel's internal intelligence agency. Now, the NDS Group was actually hacking the material of the competition of Rupert Murdoch in this country. It was accused of taking that material and putting it online for free at the time when that was the battle. Now, in addition to that, Murdoch is somebody that has been on the board of Genie Energy, which is an oil and gas firm that had extensive contracts in Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. So Murdoch is part of all of that milieu of pro-Israel businessmen who have a very close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. That in and of itself is a conflict of interest when it comes to Piers Morgan dealing with this issue. You're employed by a close friend of Netanyahu. In addition to that, it was released to Israeli media from Netanyahu's political office, a list of potential funders of Netanyahu. So this was a list compiled by Netanyahu with his own handwriting of individuals that are believed to have been funders of his first campaign to be prime minister. Now, on that list is Rupert Murdoch, the person that then goes on to employ Piers Morgan to interview people about Palestine and harangue guests about whether they do or don't support what is a prescribed group. Now, if an individual turns around and says they support said prescribed group, they can serve up to 14 years in prison. So what I said in the interview was that Piers Morgan ultimately was aiming to criminalize supporters of Palestine, because since he's left Murdoch, he's now made a great song and dance of the fact that he no longer has a moral quandary about Israel killing Palestinians on an industrial scale in Gaza. He's just against it. That's after almost 2 years of Israel doing this every single day. So what I said was that he was a propagandist for the Zionist genocide in Gaza. And what I meant by that is by constantly framing the issue in a way that was in line with Israeli military talking points, he created justifications for Israel's violence. I said that previously propagandists, for example, for the Nazi war, there was the Nuremberg trials after that, and at least one of the Nazi propagandists was executed. I was directly trying to show how seriously that has been taken previously in different legal processes that have played out. There was no imminent threat of danger. I was in no way saying that any harm should come to Piers Morgan. I was merely trying to use a historical reference to show that this is taken very seriously and that this genocide will be seen as such historically. And he then reports it to the Metropolitan Police. They haven't acted on it. Whether they will or they won't, obviously, I hope not. But I think actually for him, were I to be arrested for that, it would harm his legacy more than it would harm mine. And I don't believe that a case like that would have any legs, because anyone would be able to see that I was clearly not intending any harm to come to him. I was merely pointing out historical situations demonstrating how seriously propagandizing for genocidal regimes can be taken in different legal processes. So, you know, for the record, I don't wish any physical harm to come to him, but I do believe that a critical analysis of the news and viewing it as the product of existing material structures is essential for us to really understand what is happening. I feel too often we focus on the spectacular side of these arrangements. So we look at the very furthest end of what's happening in Gaza, for instance, without looking at the way all of that has been built about, where the invisible violence is happening. And when it comes to the media, I think people are far too willing to take things at face value. If somebody like the BBC or Piers Morgan says they are impartial, don't just repeat it because they've said it about themselves. They're saying that because they want you to believe they're impartial. But they're certainly not impartial, as these 2 years have shown. So that's what I believe is happening there. It's an unfortunate situation, and I hope that he feels okay. But I do believe that ultimately history will study the kind of interviews he's done, the hostility with which he spoke to people who were literally trying to preserve human life. And I don't think history will smile in his direction.
Yeah, very good points. And perhaps you can elaborate too on this role that he plays. You know, you've been on his program in particular, showing him to himself, right, to his face, his connections to Rupert Murdoch and also to Israel. And yet, to this day, he says, "Why would you bring this up? This was years ago. I no longer do this. I am bringing in all the voices, and all the voices get a platform." On the pro-Palestine side, on the Israel side, Zionist side. But perhaps you could speak more to this function that Piers Morgan is playing, because it seems very significant given that you have studied this Hasbara playbook, and it's quite damning in how this kind of propaganda is reshaping and reforming itself to serve its purposes even more effectively.
Well, I think the difference is that he would have somebody like me on the show in the first place. I mean, I can't remember the last time I was invited onto the BBC for a live broadcast. I mean, you're probably talking about 15 years now, almost, since I've been on a live broadcast on the BBC. There's clearly an audience for what I have to say. So it's not because I don't have the audience necessarily. It's, I think, because, you know, I'll never forget, I was actually invited onto the Tim Westwood show. Now, Tim Westwood is now largely disgraced because of allegations of sexual abuse, including of underage girls. He was a very well-known hip-hop DJ at the time. This is long before the allegations came to surface. I was invited on his show in 2010. Now, the show was cancelled at the last minute in very strange circumstances. And somebody within the station told me, this was what they claimed they heard, and this was a high-ranking person within BBC Radio at the time and a well-known face. He said they cancelled you because it was September 11th and they believed that you were going to come on air and say something that would upset people. And I was never told about that. So that just happened sort of behind my back. Of course, after that, Westwood then went on to broadcast his show live from British military bases in Afghanistan. You know, pictures came out of him writing "drop a bomb" on a board for soldiers to see. And this was BBC One Extra. This was supposedly the BBC station for black music. What does black music have to do with British militarism in Afghanistan? It has nothing to do with it. And why was Westwood literally broadcasting a show for a whole week there? So then when they invited me to go on something called Westwood's Crib Sessions, I publicly refused and wrote an article about it, which people can see on I think a website called ceasefire.org or .com, in which I detail why I'm refusing Westwood post his broadcasting a show from military bases in Afghanistan. And so what you see with so much of the media, and I think Morgan is different in that he actually to be honest with you, wants to confront, and in the case of supporters of Palestine, almost criminalize them. And that's what was happening with me. He was saying to me, oh, do you believe it's resistance or terrorism? Why don't you have a problem with what the entirety of the interviews, when people watch them, are about whether I do or don't support not only the actions, but the actual organizations which are prescribed as terrorist organizations. So what's his objective with that? What's he trying to achieve? Is that really the sort of spirit of curiosity of serious journalism? It's not. It's a sort of a glorified Jerry Springer show where he's trying to get scandalous things happening. It's salacious, it's sleazy, if I'm honest with you. But it does give you access to a large audience. And so people are then able to hear your ideas, to make their own mind up about what you're saying. And 9 times out of 10, when he invites pro-Palestinian figures on, people agree with them. And they also win people over to their side. And so that's what happened in my case. And I appreciate the fact that he did invite me, because no one else invited me during this time throughout this entire genocide. And that's fine. I don't need that or necessarily want that. I mean, apart from independent media such as yourself and others who I'm very grateful to. But ultimately, he's part of that mainstream legacy media. The only difference is he's actually willing to try and confront people and a bit more confrontational in his style. And so that then leads to these kind of situations where people face off on this. But reporting me to the police after he has literally built a reputation as supposedly being Mr. Free Speech, against cancel culture, against snowflakes. I mean, really, it's the height of snowflakery, to be honest with you. Why would you report me to the police for something I said?
Yeah. And it seems that Lowkey, this his brand of journalism has become more popular the more untenable things become. And yet, especially for the Palestinians and the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza. But now we're in a situation, Lowkey, where it seems like the entirety of the mainstream is sounding the alarm and paying attention to this particular issue when it comes to hunger for the Palestinians. Now, the Palestinian people in Gaza have been hungry for quite some time, and they've been on the brink of starvation during this horrific genocidal war against them launched by the U.S. and Israel. And now it's reaching a breaking point. And I'm wondering if you have any comments about this relationship between how Piers Morgan and the Western media as a whole react to the crisis in Gaza and the rest of the Middle East, and how it shapes their narrative, because there seems to be a lot of selectivity and not a lot of not a lot of concerted or even courageous action.
Well, the British media is deeply right-wing and actually fascistic, the majority of it. However, I think if you were to ask them what their politics is, a majority of them would say they are liberal centrists. And so while Piers Morgan has these inclinations which are authoritarian, which are censorious, which are fascistic in some ways, and actually racist, that's my personal opinion, he has inclinations which come across as racist. He thinks of himself as a liberal. So he thinks of himself as having higher moral values. And his justification for supporting war in Iran in the way he did, laughing and joking about Israel's pager attack on Lebanese, is because ultimately he believes these people are owners of a higher form of civilization, which he relates to, he believes he's part of. And so now he's confronted with the barbarism of collective Western power visited on the backs and the heads of the poorest people in the world, on mass starvation. I mean, Gaza is the Bengal famine, yeah, with the pictures. And Morgan is seeing that and trying to weigh that up next to who he thinks he is as a person. And you see it playing out across a lot of the well-fed media class in this country. They're saying this is not importing democracy. This is not importing higher civilizational values, which people actually have to fight and die for in these countries anyway. So I think that cognitive dissonance, which it gives birth to, is quite difficult for him to deal with, actually, and others like him, because they're saying this is not what we signed up for. And I also think that he personally has a form of resentment against a lot of the Israeli political figures, because he didn't think this was what it entailed. He didn't think that he was carrying water for genocide or providing the propaganda basis for them to kill all of these people in the ways they're killing them. He actually believed he was part of the sort of the good guys in the war on terror fight. And that's what this sort of very superficial, shallow obsession with particular slogans about particular political organizations, which I'm certain he could not pronounce the name of, doesn't know what it's an acronym for, and couldn't tell you 5 most famous members of it. But yet he knew that had some form of currency as a sort of signifier of uncivilization. And so he was pushing it in the way that he was. But actually, he's not special or exceptional in that regard. There's many, many figures like him across the UK media, just possibly with less algorithmic currency, I would say.
Yeah, and what do you make of, one of the things that has been, I think, so infuriating about this moment, Lowkey, is that as what is happening to the Palestinians continues, this horrific genocide, and of course this threat of regional war, that your country and my country, at least the countries that we reside in, the US and the UK, are at the lead of sparking this regional war in West Asia. That involves Lebanon, involves Yemen, involves Iran, involves Syria, everywhere. Still, this is being framed as Netanyahu's war. And this has been a huge media talking point, especially for Piers Morgan. But as you say, with the rest of this, it's not particular to him, but he has been one of the biggest champions of framing it like this. Your reaction to all of that?
Absolutely. That's about obscuring the structure behind this and the material relationships which make all of this possible. While there is a sizable proportion of the Israeli population against Netanyahu and were against him prior to the war, there were organizations like the Movement for Quality Governance, which is an Israeli so-called civil society organization funded directly by the US government, that was militating against Netanyahu for a long time. There were leaks that came out that showed that the CIA, through signals intelligence, were able to deduce that figures within Israel's external intelligence agency were mobilizing against Benjamin Netanyahu. This is in the year or two before the war. So there's an interesting dynamic there, of course, which has played out. And now I think if you are looking at different projects, ultimately I look at the two-state solution as, and the push that's behind it, as a sort of attempt to rebrand Zionism, but possibly rebrand Zionism without Netanyahu, and find a way to repackage that unjust social arrangement in a way that's more palatable to the masses. Because, you've got to think, how is Israel, say it succeeds in the maximalist objective of cleansing Gaza of Palestinians, how is it going to then go around the world as if it's just the same as everyone else? Especially when everything's been seen, and when the survivors of that genocide are scattered all over the world, where the vast majority of Palestinians now exist outside of Palestine. But after Gaza, the stories, and then once journalists actually get in and document what's been done to Gaza, it's going to be very, very difficult for Zionism to sustain itself, even if it meets its objectives in Gaza. And that, I think, is the internal contradiction and the vicious circle that it's going to be locked in, because the objectives are just simply too fantastical to be achieved. But Ironically, those objectives are the suicidal impulse of the Zionist movement. It is Zionism is intent on expansion throughout the region. So if it gets that, what will be the consequences in terms of, the quote unquote international community? So we'll see what happens. But, all of these people have played roles which are now historically documented, and people for generations to come will look at and examine critically, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe in the last few minutes, Lowkey, I have you. If you could just maybe your word to the audience about, I think when it comes to someone like Piers Morgan, and it comes to the entirety of the narrative that we hear coming out of this region from the genocide in Gaza and beyond, it can become very discouraging. I've been seeing actually a lot of, while there's been a huge shift in public opinion in favor of Palestine and Palestinians, I think there's also been a pretty deeply spread nihilism that is going through also around this issue. So talk about, if you could, your word to the audience about, as we've talked about Jeffrey Epstein, as we've talked about Piers Morgan, we're talking, and Donald Trump, we're talking about those at the top who are shaping both the narrative and, of course, working the system as it is supposed to work. But talk about what you would say to the audience about those who might feel extremely discouraged right now about not only the situation relating to Palestine, but the entire region as a whole.
Well, first of all, remember that the Palestinian story is a story of the refusal to die. So in the lead up to the Nakba, what the Zionist movement envisioned with Palestine is that they would de-Palestinianize it, take the Palestinians out of Palestine, and they would cease to be Palestinians. And at the time when the Nakba was carried out, and you had the displacement of almost 1 million Palestinians, that was almost half of the total Palestinian population. Today, there's over 12.5 million Palestinians in the world. That in and of itself is success. The Palestinians have consistently refused to die, no matter what Israel has visited upon them. Now, that refusal to die is a testament to the human spirit and will be studied for generations to come. And so whatever Israel does in Gaza, it can kill, but it can't win. Palestinians will survive, they will multiply, they will grow, and Palestine ultimately will never die. And all of us have been actors in some way in that story. So I don't think it's I definitely do not believe it is the time for despair.
Sorry, I'm muted. Great, everyone. Thanks, Lowkey, so much for joining me today. Be sure to check Lowkey's link tree after the show. We have plenty of more show coming on, but appreciate you coming on. This was a great show, and I think you informed a lot of people. Thanks so much, Lowkey. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks.
All right. We have a lot of show left to go, everybody. Our next guest is here to give not only an update on the war of the war on Ukraine, or the war on Russia via Ukraine, led by the United States and NATO, but to get into what has been an absolutely absurd flurry of developments regarding social media now turning into nuclear submarines. It is Mark Sleboda. He's a geopolitical and international security affairs expert. Mark, good to see you.
Danny, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Of course, it's always great to be with you. Mark, everyone hit that like button. We have a lot more to go because, Mark, a lot has happened. And now I want to get into the latest here relating to Donald Trump's reaction to social media postings by Dmitry Medvedev. Earlier, Dmitry Medvedev was responding to Donald Trump and his how should I say, his ultimatum. But after this, he also then said this on Telegram about Trump's threats against me and his personal truth network, which he banned from operating in our country. If some words of the former Russian president caused such a nervous reaction in the entire formidable U.S. president, it means that Russia is right in everything and will continue to go its own ways. And about the dead economy of India and Russia and entering dangerous territory, which is what Donald Trump said earlier. Well, let him remember his favorite films about the Walking Dead, as well as how dangerous a quote unquote dead hand that does not exist in nature to be, which is a nod to nuclear escalation. But Mark, how Donald Trump responded to this was quite telling. He posted this on Truth Social based on formerly provocative statements by Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, now the head deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. I've ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Donald Trump is lecturing that words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. So, Mark, what is going on here? How serious is this escalation?
Yeah, this is the equivalent of 2 high school jocks in the locker room measuring their sexual members against each other. And let's be honest, that's what this is. This is there's nothing real going on here. The idea that Donald Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines, presumably boomers, ballistic missile submarines, to, I don't know what, veer off their normal patrol path and go to some other area, which presumably is closer to Russia. It's first of all, it's absurd. Second of all, it's absolute nonsense. Let's have a moment of reality, right? Dating back to the Soviet Union and continuing with Russia. Both Russia and the United States continually have ballistic missile submarines at sea, right, doing scheduled patrols that do involve going, closer to each other's countries, sometimes right up and down each other's coasts, right, that are part of the the nuclear trifecta. This is the sub-based nuclear weapons that are there, if the absolute worst becomes, the reality, and, they're called upon to unleash devastation. I very much doubt that 2 ballistic missile submarines, 2 boomers, were sent off of their usual patrol path to be closer to Russia. And if they were, it really wouldn't mean anything in this case, right? Unless he's going to launch a nuclear first strike, which I got to be honest, I don't see is in the cards at the moment. So this is all posture. It's internet trolling. Let's be honest. What both are doing is internet trolling. And actually, what you started is actually just the tail end of an internet. I hesitate to use the word diplomacy because it's not really diplomacy. An internet trolling flame war that actually started with the U.S. neocon Senator Lindsey Graham responding to statements by the Russian presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, that was in a much more measured diplomatic way, responding to questions about Trump's moving up the deadline on his we're going to tariff the world to try to force them to stop trading with Russia sanctions, right? Tariffs and sanctions have evidently become the same thing now. There's no distinction between the two. They've merged. Tariffs, which are supposed to be an economic tool to either raise revenues or to build up, your own industries, and sanctions, which are a political punishment. Now tariffs are being used as a sanction and so forth. But Lindsey Graham, responded that, oh yeah, you've learned to live with sanctions and you've avoided them, but you've never seen what's coming next because Donald Trump is different and he's gonna do different same stuff, and it's gonna be much worse for you, blah blah blah. And then Medvedev started jumping on that and sardonically effectively mocking Lindsey Graham in a back and forth. And then it's that Trump jumped in on this. I have to say that I find all of this, I mean, it's amusing, drolly amusing in a way, as analysts or, for the audience out there, politically aware and active people, seeing diplomacy brought to them in the terms that they would engage in a feces throwing contest themselves on social media. I mean, it's, I don't know, you want to call it earthy in the 21st century sense, it's bringing geopolitics and diplomacy, entertainment to the masses. I whenever Trump does something like this, I love posting on my own videos the scene from the original Gladiator film, where he is out in the middle of the amphitheater after having just finished a contest, and he says, "Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is that not what you've come here for?" That's Donald Trump. Are you not entertained? Because this is obviously why you elected this narcissistic buffoon to the office, is for the entertainment value. Ultimately, I mean that's what he did as the host of The Apprentice and so forth. That is the way he conducts diplomacy. I mean, we don't get readouts, we don't get transcripts of his calls with foreign leaders. We get Trump's comments on it on social media. And I don't know. Diplomacy has been reduced to the lowest common denominator. I mean, the lowest possible level. It's a vulgarity at this point. I don't think that this is any more constructive than you engaging with a troll on social media, right? I mean, it's hard not to do, right? You want it, it's tempting, and then you're just like, no, you're not going to reason with him. You're not going to ration with him. You're not going to win an argument. No, just don't do it. Don't feed the trolls. Well, Medvedev fed the trolls. And yes, it's drolly amusing, and I get a little, gut chuckle out of it, instinctual but really, Medvedev should not be doing this. I understand that there is a kind of, I don't know, it's not really Batman and Robin, but there is a, leader and sidekick routine going on between Putin and Medvedev again, right? You could say that Medvedev is the bad cop to Putin's good cop when it comes to diplomacy. You could say that, Medvedev is, I've often referred to him as Zhirinovsky 2.0, after the Russian firebrand populist and nationalist Zhirinovsky passed away. That Dmitry Medvedev has had to step up to fill his shoes because it was a vital part of the Russian political scene, and seriously reversing the neoliberal twat that Medvedev was previously, before he either was completely rebranded or had a Damascene conversion somewhere along the way. Take your reading. But I just don't think this is useful or constructive. I don't think it's, again, it's amusing for us out here active in the political sphere. It gives us something to talk about. It gives the media something to talk about. I'm not even so sure that this is what we should be talking about. Probably not. It's but it's like fast food. It's like junk food. It's hard to say no, right? So we're indulging in it like everyone else, right? I'll admit, I've been in Russia for 20 years. I miss Arby's. I miss a beef and cheddar sandwich, right? So I understand the indulging in things that aren't necessarily good for you. I think Medvedev crossed the line when he mentioned the dead hand. Now, what he's referring to there is a Russian fail-safe nuclear dead hand switch. I believe the system. Right. First of all, it's not proven that it exists, but everyone knows it exists, right? The official name, I believe, is Perimeter. The idea is if the U.S. conducts a devastating and successful nuclear first strike, a decapitation strike, and wipes out the Russian leadership before they have time to order a nuclear response, then there are automated measures put in place that, if not regularly, updated, rescinded, then would result in Russian nuclear response being automatically launched. So basically, he felt that Trump was threatening Russia, and he threatened, in response. Now, I don't believe that Trump made an overtly nuclear threat. He was threatening lots of other things in both real and unreal terms. But this is not the first time Medvedev or other Russian political figures, including at times even Putin, have either alluded to or outright mentioned nuclear weapons when threats from the United States appear on the horizon.
Mark, I don't want to stop you, not to interrupt you or anything, but is there something, a machine or even an animal or something making? There's some humming or something I'm hearing in the background. I don't know if you hear that as well, but some people are saying, and I can hear it a bit through mine. I don't know if it's resolvable, but it's not a big deal. I'm just wanted to make sure you're aware if there's anything you can change.
So I don't think it's useful or constructive. I don't think that the Russians, every time they feel threatened by the United States, do not need to respond by reminding the Americans that they're a nuclear superpower too, and that is the potential, slippery slope with any conflict. I just don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's useful. And it has its own repercussions. For one thing, Russia's conventional forces have proven that they are more than capable of dealing with any threat that NATO, the West, can conceivably throw at them. So a resort to a nuclear, I regard it as a kind of insecurity, right? Being threatened by the hyperpower, yes, Russia's national interests are at stake in Ukraine. Yes, it's regarded as an existential conflict, but there's really no reason to bring up nukes. Nukes aren't necessary in Ukraine. Even if NATO invaded, they wouldn't be necessary. I don't think that Medvedev bringing this up now or previously was either useful or constructive. I don't think Russian officials should be dangling, the potential nuclear deterrent as often as they do. I don't think it solves anything. It obviously doesn't, and I don't think that it's necessary. And I say that as someone who was in nuclear engineering for the U.S. Navy. The U.S. It alludes to it. Sometimes you'll hear all options are on the table, which is meant to say that yes, including a nuclear option, but no one, really takes that seriously. I don't think it was wise on Medvedev's point to engage in this, but I think it was even worse to make that comment. It didn't even really apply to the situation. I don't know why he had to throw it in. It doesn't,
Right.
it doesn't.
Because he was referencing the economic
Yeah, the
slander,
economics,
right?
the
Right.
dead, the Walking Dead, and then dead
Russia and
hands.
India are
Yeah,
dead
it's kind of beating a
economies.
bush there.
Right.
I don't see that it was even particularly witty or sardonic, and it certainly wasn't in security terms. Now, of course, Donald Trump talking about anyone else saying that words mean something.
Right.
I mean, come on, get out of here. I mean, every half hour or so, he reverses a position completely with his ill-chosen words, right? Zelensky is a dictator. Did I say that? It doesn't sound like something I'd say, yeah, obviously words only matter when they come out of someone else's mouth, not when they come out of Donald Trump's mouth. And Donald Trump's response, which I don't believe at the end of the day was actually anything, right? I don't believe that anything actually occurred. I think he's just feces talking, right? I mean, he's pulling out his sexual member and saying, "Oh, look how big mine is," right?
Right. And I can show it. I can show what he said to reporters.
No, I don't want to see that. Actually, I don't. Unless you're talking about something else.
Yeah. Well, we'll just hear what he said in response to the media publicly rather than just a social media. Forgive the horrific background interference because they always do this after they get off a chopper. But here we go.
Well, you just have to read what he said. He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared.
So, I mean, this is the interesting part, Mark, is that for someone who has framed himself as a so-called Nobel Peace Prize candidate, his reaction to Medvedev slinging feces and swinging his you-know-what is ready for nuclear war. I mean, that's
he's prepared for nuclear war. Okay, all right. First of all, I have to say that Russia's nuclear arsenal is larger. I mean, as long as we're measuring our members there, right? Russia's nuclear arsenal is larger, and a considerable portion of it is actually more modernized, right? And Russia has carriers now, like hypersonics, like Oreshnik, that the U.S. simply doesn't have. And if the last year or so of conflicts in the Middle East and in Ukraine have taught us anything, it's that U.S.'s air defense sucks. I mean, that's their Achilles heel. Both the Patriot and the THAAD system underperform. They don't have enough of the systems. They have a drastic shortage of the interceptors for those systems. And the other thing it's proven is that despite lots of talk for more than a decade talking up Iron Dome or David's boomerang. No, sorry, it's not boomerang. Although since it often fires back on itself, maybe it should be called. But David's arrow, David's sling. That it's not the Israelis that have the best air defense system in the world. It's Russia. Russia has an integrated, interconnected, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare shield that is, nothing is 100%, but it's at least of systems that are proven, that have been used and proven. It's quite obviously the best in the world. So, I mean, he can talk, he can throw feces if he wants, but I actually believe that Putin's response is better. And I understand, Medvedev is playing a role. Again, bad cop, good cop, Putin is above the fray and diplomatic. Medvedev is, playing the game on Trump's dirty trolling terms on social media. You could call Medvedev Putin's anger management translator, if you want, but I think it's gone too far. And I think this dead hand, now obviously Trump's response was a whole nother level of absurdity and political theater here. But I think both, both sides, their mommy needs to come and tell them that they need to get off the internet and go to bed. I mean, that's really the situation that both of them, because while I don't believe that this amounts to anything, Donald Trump is an erratic, a quixotic, mercurial, and temperamental person. And, God knows what he would really do, if he's pressed hard enough, if his ego is challenged enough. And he's in an increasingly desperate and panicked situation, both internationally and domestically. It's hard to point out anything that he has done that has succeeded.
I mean, the ultimatum situation, Mark, is 50 days, 10 days. I mean, that the level of desperation, even just tracing the beginning of so-called talks with Russia to where things are now. I mean, that's a desperate situation. He's cornered. There's nothing, he can't really do very much other than what he's doing, which is chaotic and what it is.
Yeah,
But
and I think actually what Medvedev said, Medvedev in one of his quotes compared him to walking the path of sleepy Joe Biden, using Trump's own puerile derogative for Joe Biden. I mean, I've said many critical things of Joe Biden before, but not quite as childish, I think. Anyway, Medvedev choosing those words, I think that's what really torqued Trump off. Particularly as, in a way, it's accurate, of course, right? Trump, rather than taking the opportunity to walk away from this conflict, which, to be fair, I never thought he would, right? But there was always that possibility for those who believe in hope. Instead, he's got left with escalate to de-escalate, to finish this on American terms rather than on Russian terms, because Russia is winning the proxy conflict. And Trump, whatever he may think of Zelensky, and he has nothing but contempt for him, and whatever he may think of European leaders, and he has nothing but contempt for them, and likewise back and forth, right? He's still the U.S. president. And the Kiev regime is a proxy U.S. state, and he's got to preserve it. He's got to do his best to preserve it. And if he doesn't end this in a way where he can, if not declare victory as his usual, everything fails, Trump declares victory and walks away. I mean, that's already the standard proven, whether we're talking with the Houthis in the Red Sea, or a trade war with China, or bombing Iran, to save Israel. It's Trump, bombasts and declares victory and walks away. Well, that's what he is trying to do here. But Putin is not about to make any concessions here, for Russia's national interest. They've paid too much for this. So what else can Trump do, right? Sanctions have no effect. He's admitted that himself in an interview this week. They're really good at sanctions. They're good at avoiding sanctions. It may not affect them, right? The only hope is that the Chinese or the Indians or the other people that do a lot of energy business with Russia, that they'll be afraid. And I have to say that doesn't look like the situation. Chinese definitely, are very diplomatically throwing Trump the middle finger. And they're like, you want us to cut off rare earths again? Really? Go down that path. And India is just outraged, that someone they were trying naively, I believe, to partner with.
Yeah, they were not supposed to be treated like this, Mark.
They were not supposed to be treated like this. And I mean, they've already been sanctioned. They've already had Indian companies sanctioned by Joe Biden and everything. And I'm like, well, what do you want? You're the one trying to crawl in bed with the Americans. Sure that it would help your economy. Sure that American investment would come pouring into India. And has it? No. Choices, consequences. But India does seem to be holding firm for the moment, at least. They're not going to be dictated by the United States, right? This, in a way, this threat of tariff war is bringing more unity between China and India than Trump's first declared tariff war on them,
Right.
because
And the
now,
rest of BRICS too, with Brazil
and the
too.
rest
I
of
mean,
it.
it's all
Lula, yeah, Lula's, gringo, you're not going to order us about gringo, and we don't need an emperor.
Yeah.
Lula found his spine too. You're absolutely right there. Good point. And South Africa as well. I mean, not that South Africa does huge. Brazil doesn't buy a lot of it. I don't know why Brazil keeps getting lumped into this, because Brazil doesn't buy large amounts of energy from Russia, and the U.S. has a trade surplus with Brazil. So once again, it's just because Lula is a lefty, and the Brazilian
it's the BRICS dollar demon.
Yeah, it's the BRICS going after Bolsonaro. Yeah, I mean,
right.
It's pure political, geopolitical. It has nothing to do with economics when it comes to Brazil. But Putin, responding not directly, but quite obviously in reply to Trump's comments about he's disappointed with Putin, right? He's frustrated, he's disappointed, because we have a really nice, polite conversation, and then in the evening he goes on continuing the war, right? Bombing nursing homes and puppy rescue centers and little kids' birthday parties and like the usual stuff. Back in the real world, civilian casualties of Russian missile strikes are almost ridiculously, miraculously low, right? The collateral damage is on a magnitude less than anything the U.S. just did under Trump when he was bombing Yemen, right? Or that certainly that Israel is doing in Gaza, which has the exact opposite intention, or even when the Kiev regime is conducting, their mostly ineffective long-range strikes against Russia. Russia's long-range strike, I saw the other day, Russia made 300 drone and missile attacks, and there was one civilian casualty. And that's according to the Ukrainian, right? The Kiev regime's assessment. I'm like, how is that even possible? How do you fire 300 missiles and drones and only accidentally kill one person? It's insane. So, him trying to depict this as some type of, it's just propaganda. It's just absolute nonsense, or him speaking out of complete ignorance. Take your pick. But Putin responded, that he's so disappointed, right? Putin has been consistent, right? He's never changed, since at the least June of last year. He's clearly stated what Russia's requirements were for a ceasefire and for a permanent end to the conflict, and that they must be connected together, and they have not budged. And evidently Trump fooled himself into thinking that, with his great mafioso, thug extortion, art of the deal tactics, that he could, force Putin to compromise. He keeps saying, I thought we had a deal 2 or 3 times. Where did you ever get that? Like through a phone call? You think you were gonna have a get a treaty, a ceasefire for a major geopolitical conflict like this out of comments on the phone? Grow up. That's not the way this business works, and
Mark,
certainly not with Russia winning.
I wanted to actually get deeper into this response that you're talking about, because Trump has been throwing around the nuclear submarines. He's been throwing around tariffs, sanctions, all of these threats, right? Ultimatums. And I'll play a few references to his interview that was side by side with Mr. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. Here is what he had to say, as you were referencing to Donald Trump and this idea of expectations. It's in Russian, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it a little faster and read it. So it says, for any disappointments from anyone, as for disappointments from anyone, all disappointments come from excessive expectations. That's a well-known general rule, but in order to approach resolving the issue by peaceful means, thorough discussions are needed, and not in public. This needs to be done calmly in the quiet
social media
of the negotiation process. And it was precisely for this that we were making these groups, as mentioned. And then Another part of this interview that hasn't been getting as much attention, but I think is significant, is this. Sputnik reports that Vladimir Putin, during this interview, said that the first Oreshnik is out and has already entered service with the Russian military. So maybe you can talk about this, because Donald Trump seemed very confident, Mark, in the threat of the so-called nuclear submarines that he stationed somewhere not known to anybody where they would be. And yet we have this weapon that many, when it was first launched not too long ago, during the Biden administration, believe actually could outmode nuclear weapons in terms of how the impact, the speed, all of it, of the Oreshnik missile. So what's the significance of this together? Vladimir Putin talking about excessive expectations and disappointments, and this move made here, this announcement.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty sure that you've probably heard Russia's response to Trump's last post, saying that he was launching or diverting, or whatever he claimed he was doing with nuclear subs. The Russia's response to this, the Kremlin's response.
Mm-hmm. No, please outline.
No, you didn't, because the Kremlin didn't respond, because they didn't feel the need to respond to this, right? Let me, channeling my inner Medvedev, respond to this, right? Unfortunately, Trump's diverting, 2 nuclear submarines closer to our borders has caused me a great trauma. I've suffered a great physical injury. It turns out that I have rolled my eyes so far up into my eye sockets that they have, penetrated into my cranium, and I've now got internal bleeding on the brain, right? That is me chanting, this is Russia's response. They're not saying it. They're not saying anything. But if I was channeling my inner Medvedev, that is how I would troll Trump in response to this. There's nothing. There's no need to respond to this, right? If you want to believe, you can, that Putin's threat that the Oreshnik is now rolled out in serial production, and will be showing up on a battlefield soon near you, right? It is some type of oblique response, to that. I guess you can interpret it that way. I think that's probably more coincidence than a studied response, right? I don't think that Putin is here, laying out, his sexual member with Medvedev and Trump, measuring it here. But I think that Putin's, reference to the Oreshnik is a lot more pertinent and important when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. Why? Because unlike nuclear weapons, which are still, of course, an international taboo, right, for their use, and rightly so, they, whether we're talking tactical nukes or something else, they should be. They're not needed. Putin has himself mentioned before that with the Oreshnik, you have a conventional weapon with, absolute precision that can deal a conventional effect that has a strategic level, right? That it is that powerful a weapon, and that precise, and that long range, and that accurate, and so forth. I don't think he's making a threat to Trump with that. I think he's simply stating facts that this is going to appear on the battlefield. And if there are further threats, as the Germans keep hinting, of long-range strikes against Russia, again, it's pretty obvious what they're hinting at, right? We're not going to give them the Taurus, but we're going to help them build their own weapons that will look remarkably similar to the Taurus, right? Except that
slip them into the...
They're made in Ukraine, right? Because a made in Ukraine sticker was put on them at their final destination, and therefore they're made in the way this branding stuff works, right?
You open the factory door there, look, they got a new way. They got a new Taurus. They made it
They keep
themselves.
hinting at this, right? At an
Yeah.
escalation with this, and Russia's like, go ahead, because we reserve the right to respond, as if you fired a weapon at that point. And the Oreshnik, of course, would be the perfect demonstrative. Now, I don't believe that Russia is going to jump out and respond to a missile strike by the Kiev regime by launching Oreshniks at German military bases. I don't think we've reached that level yet. Russia, again, still doesn't feel the need to do, because even if we know they've only got like 100, 150 max Tauruses that they can provide to the Kiev regime. We know that Russia has shut down large numbers of Storm Shadows and Scalps and Attackums. They very quickly adjusted, and brought them down through a combination of their electronic warfare and their air defense. And I see no reason why, even a longer range, more sophisticated Taurus than the Storm Shadow wouldn't, follow the same path. So there isn't a need to escalate outside of the strategic box where Russia is handily winning, when the latest escalation by the West doesn't actually change the calculus, on the battlefield. Isn't changing, the ultimate outcome. So again, it's that scene from Star Wars: A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, when the X-Wings are, channeling down the paths of the Death Star, and they're all worried. Oh, there's TIE fighters here, there's guns emplacements out there, and the leader's just there. Stay on target. Stay on target. That's what the Kremlin is doing, right? They're not responding to provocations like this, nuclear submarines or Taurus missiles. They're just keeping doing what they're doing, which, as of this week, is finally wrapping up Chasiv Yar, now looking down from great heights on the Kiev regime's last defensive line in Konstantinovka, Slavyansk, and Kramatorsk, the last defensive line in the Donbass. And this deep, penetrating, flanking maneuver north and west and east at this point of Pokrovsk, which is threatening to move the critical situation for the Kiev regime forces there from an operational encirclement to something more like an actual entrapment or a cauldron, effectively. It's a very bad situation, and that's not mine. That is according to the Kiev regime's commanders on the ground reporting. How bad the situation, how critical it is for them, because they're not shy about talking about how bad it is. So that's what Russia keeps doing. All of this is noise. This is background noise, right?
Yeah.
Russia is keeping focused on the SMO. Trump can be disappointed. He can be frustrated. He can be panicking, insecure, because ultimately, that's, what a lot of this is. But he can't change anything, right? He does not have the economic power to coerce Russia or the BRICS countries to do what he wants in this, and he does not have the weapons, the type or the quantity needed to change the calculus on the battlefield. So impotence, irrelevance, and Trump doesn't handle that well, and in a way, that's actually maybe the most dangerous situation, because you've got this puerile, narcissistic megalomaniac in charge of what is still in many ways the richest and most powerful country in the world, depending on exactly what statistic you're talking about. Yeah, they're over exceeded now on a few variables by China and Russia both, but this very emotionally unstable, childish individual is frustrated and feeling impotent and irrelevant, and that of course is a dangerous situation. You just have to hope that there are enough sane people capable of restraint in the Pentagon and the intelligence, which
Right.
wow, that's a tall order
It is.
there, because if Mark Milley is any cue, that those people aren't any brighter or wiser than their political leaders. But that's what we've got at this point. So let's hope there isn't a escalation by the Trump administration that, again, would make no sense, but would be something, shall we say, crazy or unpredictable. That's always a possibility. And the same thing could actually come out of Kiev, of course, too, or could be done, as if it were Kiev as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mark, I guess what I wanted to ask you about now is, given it, a lot of people make it out, and please integrate your what's going on in the battlefield maybe more detailed into this, because there's a lot of people who look at this from the outside and say, well, Russia has all the advantages, right? They have the battlefield advantage. Putin announces an Oreshnik Oreshniks are ready to go, which gives a huge advantage in terms of the escalatory ladder if it should get there. You said it has more nukes than the United States, and it has a stable economy right now. So some people ask from the outside, they're like, well, why doesn't Zelensky also, if you look at the other side, all the desperation is there. Zelensky, the administration in Ukraine, the proxy government, very much unstable. The United States, very much unable to really push on any button that will change the trajectory of this. So then why doesn't Russia go further? So if we could talk about what's happening on the battlefield in the context of what some are seeing as well, why doesn't Russia just wrap this up now? That's a question I hear all the time, and I know you've been on programs that ask that same question.
Okay, so first of all, if we're talking there's a difference between, I would say, going further and going faster, right? These are very very different things. As to going further, I think Russia's given every indication that they are going further, right? I don't know how much further is. I'm sure that the Kremlin still does not intend or does not want to occupy all of Ukraine. My belief is that they'll simply be left with no good option at the end, and no better option. It's a terrible option to militarily occupy all of Ukraine, particularly West Ukraine, right? It's bad. But unfortunately, the West, the Kiev regime in the West, are almost certainly going to make it where leaving any kind of rump, Banderite state that would just into the future, be turned into a weapons platform, and its entire population turned into some kind of, anti-Russian warrior case. Those options are even worse. So I still think that the Kremlin, whatever they may want or not, and it's not a good option, but the least bad option may be to militarily occupy all of Ukraine at the end, right? But the end is still a far way off, because Ukraine is a very big country. But Putin alluded to that during the same conversation with Lukashenko, where he said, we are not taking land. We're not, taking this from everyone. This is ours. We are recovering it. And he didn't limit that to Donbass or even to Novorossiya or even East Ukraine. He was talking about Ukraine, right? Now, that's a pretty revanchist statement. Let's be honest. He's basically, saying that everything that has happened since the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union and everything now is you've pushed things so far that now it's all we're revisiting all of that, at least when it comes to Ukraine. And of course, Russia's other neighbors will start to get worried, when, understandably so, whether that's pertinent or not. To which I would say, well, then don't try to crawl in bed with NATO, so you don't end up in the same situation as Ukraine did. But Budanov himself this week. I just saw an interview that he's done this week with a journalist where he talked also that they're facing a situation where Ukraine could cease to exist if they don't change something. And he seemed very serious about it. He was talking. He even used an allegory. This Banderite psychopath evidently is a stamp collector too. And he was talking about stamps that he collects, and that a lot of them are from countries that no longer exist, and that he's afraid that Ukraine is on a path to that right now. And he was sober, right? I mean, he wasn't promising a beach party in Crimea anymore. He was having a very grim and grudging assessment of where the Kiev regime, really is at this point. So that's farther, right? Russia is going farther, and right now there is very little sense that even if Trump turned around and started suddenly making concessions towards all of Russia's demands for the special military operation, I'm not so sure that's enough anymore. I think that boat has sailed. It's gone. So as for faster, and everyone, why doesn't Russia just finish this? Okay, too much Hollywood, too much Call of Duty, not enough the realities of modern warfare. Lavrov spelled it out this week. For the first time, he said, and he was kind of making reference to the Great Northern War and World War I and World War II, the Napoleonic Wars. But he said in all previous conflicts, Russia has at least had some allies, right? Even if they were allies of convenience and, whatnot for the moment, but that now Russia is taking on the entirety of the West alone. And then he later corrected himself and said, "Oh yeah, well, North Korea has and hats off to them. They have joined in as well, but that's the point is still largely made. Russia is fighting all of the West, right? They're fighting them, not American, not so many and not uniformed American and British troops on the battlefield, but all but, right? I mean, economically, politically, with all the weapons they can throw, with their intelligence, their secret, not so secret because they admitted that the CIA established bases, all signals intelligence bases all along the Russian border once they took over the Kiev regime's Ukrainian intelligence organs and refashioned them, right? They're bragging about this in the pages of the New York Times, right? Which for any other country, right, that alone would be grounds for war. And then they also more recently admitted and again bragged in the pages of the New York Times that it is U.S. generals and British generals, the Telegraph also talked about, that have been directing this conflict, like down to the tactical, from the strategic, the operational level, all the way down to the tactical level. They've been running this entire conflict out of Wiesbaden in Germany, right? And it's simply also the fact that war has changed, right? Backed by the armaments and the money of all of the Western countries, all the productive military industrial capacity of the West put together. That is it's a near peer conflict, right? And now, this is the first drone conflict, right? We've never had a little bit of drones, started to take prevalence in that short affair with Azerbaijan and Armenia, right? But still to a much less degree, and that wasn't big enough, and it wasn't long enough, to really do more than provide a foreshadowing of what this conflict was. But this is an all new type of conflict. It's why Russia is right now using many less armored vehicles at the front line. They're just not using a lot of them. Why?
Right.
Because drones, I mean, when you can take out a couple $1 million vehicle, right, with a $10,000, $20,000 FPV drone, you don't do that.
Yeah, you don't see any. It's really the drone war that you see coming out in terms of imagery, whether it's on Telegram or even mainstream media. You're not seeing Russian tanks and armored vehicles rolling in, approaching anything like a front line or anything like that.
They're
shooting
still
off.
being used, but they're being used much more sparingly, right? This conflict started out as it's still an attrition war, but the nature of that attrition war has changed. Whereas previously, in the first year, even the first year and a half of this conflict, it was an artillery war assisted by drones, right? Drone reconnaissance, and then FPV drones started to make their presence. Now it is a drone war where artillery and armored vehicles and glide bombs and all of these other things still play a role, right? But the dominant at the contact lines, the dominant presence is still drones, and it has resorted that the conflict has changed. Both drones and the advent of complete satellite surveillance and drone surveillance on both sides, and long range strike capabilities with precision long range strikes like drones, but also including things like multiple launch rocket systems and like HIMARS or Tornadoes, and on either side. You can't mass large numbers of troops, right, or large numbers of vehicles. They are immediately identified before they reach the contact line and are hit. So everything is about dispersing forces. Most people would be surprised at the small scale of most of the conflicts right at the contact line in general terms. That this is regularly, company level, even platoon level forces, even squad level at some points that are actually engaging, right? And it's more forces are only brought up then at critical moments. And sometimes they're brought up as infantry, and sometimes they're still coming up in armored vehicles and with some tank support and stuff. But that is not the normal state of affairs. That is only for particular maneuver circumstances or breaking through a line. Everything now is drones and infantry, right? That is the majority of the contact line. It's not to say that tanks aren't important or that artillery isn't important. It's just that there's new realities with drones, with satellite surveillance, and the attrition war continues, right? The Kiev regime has pointed out, Russia has pointed out that whereas in the beginning of the conflict, some 70 to 80% of casualties on the Russian side, and maybe even higher on the Ukrainian side, were from artillery, right? Which was normal in big conflicts for the last century. That has changed in the past year and a half, and now it's the majority is drones, FPV drones, right? That is the majority of casualties on both sides. So that changes. The nature of conflict has changed, and future conflicts are both having to learn from this, and also a realization that the evolution of warfare is happening so fast that even learning the lessons from this war, the next war, you're already going to be behind because things are just changing so fast. The evolution to battlefield cycle is now less than 2 months, right? Sometimes considerably less than 2 weeks or 2 months, between identifying a need for something and it being conceived, produced, and appearing on the battlefield. It's everything is moving so fast. So if Russia could move much faster, if they were willing to take the mass casualties that the Western media still, that's still the yes, Kiev regime is losing. All right, they're losing badly, but Russia is suffering so many casualties, right? We saw actually a Trump another absurd social media post showing what erroneous disinformation, right, direct from the Kiev regime that he is obviously operating and making policy decisions on, because the Kiev regime tells him that Russia has taken 120,000 KIA in the first half of this year, which is just absolute complete nonsense, right? According to even BBC funded, info warfare outlet Media Zona, they can't find more than around, the last time I checked, it was around 120,000 Russian dead in all 3 years of this conflict, right? And at the same time, Russia has every advantage, right? They have drone advantage, they have artillery advantage, they have glide bomb advantage, they have manpower advantage, they have artillery, they have every advantage, but somehow, according to the numbers Trump is operating from, they've only lost 8,000. Oh my God, this is just so, talk about absolute reversal of reality that obviously Trump is operating from and obviously fed by the Kiev regime. But Russia could be taking those fictional mass casualties if they wanted to push things faster. They're not willing to take those casualties, right? For reasons of the military, for reasons of the domestic political situation in Russia, they're not willing to push things faster, because even with the Kiev regime suffering all of these deficits that we're talking about, the realities of modern conflict, this drone heavy trench building by building conflict, it's still a bloody, nasty little attrition war. And Russia has learned how to fight it over the course of the last 3 years. They're learning how to leverage all of their advantages, but it's still a slow, grinding war of attrition for the most part. And yes, all right, I understand that people out there, they're locked in Hollywood and Call of Duty and American beating up on third world countries, in the 90s and early 2000s. But this is not that conflict. You do not understand this conflict. And I say it from someone who, not having been on the front line, I don't understand this conflict in the visceral way that someone only can. But I've heard enough from the people who have been, and maybe you need to listen to some more to Russian and Ukrainian, officers or enlisted that are, actually engaging with each other, right, in encounter battles on the contact line. Warfare is new, right? Russia, and at the end of the day, Russia is still always realizing that the end game of this could be that NATO intervenes directly. That becomes less and less likely as time goes on, for multiple reasons. Right now, not only Trump, but also, how deteriorated and out of stock the Western militaries are, and the political climate and everything. But still, that always, you can't play games with that. You have to maintain enough of everything. The German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, has mentioned several times now that Russia is producing, the Russian military, it's not only outproducing all of NATO in the type of munitions and weapons needed for this conflict by 4 times over, right? But they're producing more than they're using. So they're actually stocking their shelves while the West shelves are empty. Why is that? Because that is the deterrent, right? These 2 reserve armies that the Wall Street Journal told us about a month ago, right? This a total of around 240,000 troops, right? Volunteer soldiers trained up for the SMO are just chilling, right? On the Finnish border, in the north and elsewhere towards the west. Why? Well, they could be put into this conflict at some point to exploit a big collapse, a big crumbling, when it comes. But more importantly, they're there as a deterrent to NATO. Don't do it. Don't even think about it. Yeah. Right? So Russia does have more force they could put into it. But even with all that, it's still not going to change the fact of what battle dominated by a war of attrition, fought with FPV drones and backed up by everything else with satellite surveillance, the way that works out. Because Russia still has to clear every trench. They still have to clear every building, every room of every building, right? And they're trying as much as they can not to level every single building, although I mean, if you take a look at Chasiv Yar and some of the other cities, the Kiev regime is not making it easy for them to not do that. But I mean, there are other situations, right? Sleboda was taken with largely intact, right? That is still the goal, because Russia is not at war with the Ukrainian people. Russia is at war with the regime in Kiev and their NATO masters. Particularly, of course, in East Ukraine, but even more general. And all of this now Russia has to rebuild. And that's expensive, right? Russia doesn't have that money, to be perfectly honest. I still don't even know where that's going to come from. And China's not going to come up and magically present a big check, say, oh, this is for you, just rebuild Ukraine. That's not going to happen. So they're trying to minimize not only damage to their own military, but they're trying to minimize civilian casualties, and they're trying as much as they possibly can to minimize, infrastructure damage to Ukrainian towns and cities as well. So I know you want things to be faster. You want to be able to smack back against these natural controls, right? You want to just get out of that mentality. Just chill. It's not going to be over quick, right?
Well, we have 3 years of proof of that. Plus, we're going
There were plenty of people who said this would all be over in 2 months when this conflict started. I was not one of those people.
But what's so interesting, Mark, is that I think in your final reaction as we close here, I feel like the Trump administration, what it has done is, for as much as it has almost like torn whatever remaining mask was on the United States as an empire of force projection, it has also demonstrated just how Russia is winning, and they're winning the war based on the exact model that you've been studying, the exact methods and approach to this. So that is really what in my opinion should be taken away here, is that Russia is winning the war as they are engaging in it. And just like Iran has said during that 12-day war that they were preparing for war with the United States, and they've been preparing for years and years, not Israel. Russia, what did Lavrov recently say, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov? He said, we're at war with the entire collective West. There's no allies there. That's what Russia is preparing for. Ukraine is a battleground for that. And so your final reaction to this, that Russia is winning this war. So changing course seems to carry more risks maybe than benefits. But
that's why I said they're in a box, a strategic box, where within that box they're winning, and they're winning handily. And all these provocations are meant to take Russia outside of that box, right? To make them strike back directly at the West or something. And they don't want to get out of that box, because inside that box, they're winning. They're winning at their own pace. They're winning handily. They're not only winning militarily on the battlefield, they're winning economically. The West is waging an existential economic war of sanctions, right? Weaponizing their control of the global financial architecture, as they're doing this, they've lost because the Russian economy keeps growing faster than the US and the EU, and the end of the dollar hegemony, right? The end has been hastened by all of this, right? BRICS is set on the course. They've got the new development bank, right? Now they're working on an alternative to SWIFT. They're trading in each other's currencies. Trump is all upset about this, right? He's tariffing BRICS 10% across the board, talking about them as anti-American because they don't want to operate by a currency that allows the U.S. to economically control, all the financial transactions in the world. Russia's winning economically. They're winning diplomatically, right? Politically, because the rest of the world outside the West has never bowed to all the pressure that the U.S. and the West, the moral pressure, the moral arguments, the economic pressure, the political pressure, everything that they've leveled on them. The rest of the world said no, right? And now China and India are threatened with 100% tariffs, and as far as we can tell, they're also saying no. So Russia is winning across the board, right? There's even arguments that Russia is actually winning the media war, the narrative war, right? And they certainly are outside the English language sphere. But even within the English language sphere, there's so many cracks in the narrative at this point that they're worried that Russia is even winning that battle. So, I mean, Russia's actually batting far above their capabilities with the skill, with the patience, with the restraint and the precise use of force in all the spectrums when it is needed, right? Someone's going to look back at this someday. And it's never saying that Russia hasn't made mistakes along the way, because I would never say that, because I've called out some things repeatedly that I thought were mistakes. But
at the beginning of the show. Yeah, at the beginning of the show.
Compared to everyone else, compared to the opponent, right, they are masters. They are maestros, above looking down on this. And this will be studied in the future, how Russia, right, the gas station with snow, or Nigeria with snow, the gas station country, was able to do this to the entirety of the West. This is the global order changing conflict. It's happening right now. And if things keep developing this way, China may never have to fight that conflict with the United States, because they won't be able to out the other side of this. They won't have the military capability anymore. And the blow against Iran was lessened because the U.S. was already out of air defense and long-range strike capability. Right. They went to smack Iran around. And so Iran, because of that, they had to, give up. They said, all right, we can't fight a long-range strike war of attrition against Iran because we've already used up all of the air defense that we need to defend Israel and defend our military bases. So that has very much indirectly helped Iran survive what was, quite obviously intended to be a regime change effort against Iran. So Russia, with some assistance from North Korea, is still bearing the brunt of all of this. Militarily, politically, economically, narratively, they're taking on all of the West. Yeah, and they've got some, backup support, from the rest of the multipolar world. Yeah, you go get them, right? We'll keep trading with you. Thanks. But all of that aside, at the end of the day, it's what was necessary, and Russia is winning. However long it takes, and it could take a long time because Ukraine is a big country, right? I keep pointing that out. Russia has to militarily occupy every town and village and hamlet. Yes. I mean, they have to clear it. They have to occupy it. They have to begin reconstruction. It's a tall order. Have some patience and some respect for what is happening, right? Yes, we all want instant gratification. We all want to be able to reply back to this nonsense. Yes. Oh, the offensive has failed and the conflict line is stagnant and Russia's taking mass casualties. Just be the duck, right? Let the water slide off the back, because you know the truth of what is going on. You've been following the truth from the beginning of this conflict. You've seen how wrong they have been all along. You've seen how right, in relative terms, the Russian side and its supporters in the alt media have been, in comparison to all this lies and propaganda and disinfo and pablum you've heard out of the West. Just chill. Just be Putin. Show the calmness,
Yes.
the confidence that he does. I will never, I aspire to that. I don't have it. I'm a little too got a little too much Medvedev in me to be the Putin, but aspire to be the Putin.
Yeah, it drives. I mean, it's driving. There couldn't be more of an anti-Putin on the other side now with Donald Trump, and it's obviously driving him mad, and it's driving Lindsey Graham mad, and it's driving the entirety of the U.S. to the warmongering foreign policy establishment.
Watch them spin.
They are going mad right now, and we're going to keep covering it though, Mark. And it's been really good to be with you. We'll head out together. I want to make sure everyone knows that your Boosty account is in the video description now. So when this program is over, they can go there, check it out. Be sure to support Mark Sleboda's work, because he is always on the circuit, and we do very much appreciate his time. Be sure to hit the like button before you leave. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. You can find Lowkey's information in the video description as well. All the places to support this show, Patreon, Substack, and much more. And tomorrow I will be on with our mutual friend Mark, Brian Berletic, and we'll also have KJ No on. I always want to have you, Mark, with it, but the times, you know how it is with Mark out in Thailand. It's like I got to do the show at 9 p.m. Eastern, which will be tomorrow.
That's
and
okay. I'll be watching both
it's
of those.
4 a.m. your
tomorrow,
time.
Monday, I'll be catching both of those. So.
It's 4 a.m. your time, so. But one day, hopefully, we can get that together again. But with all that said, Mark, any final thoughts before we head out?
No, just do what I'm gonna do, right? Have a nice summer drink, and it takes some grim satisfaction from the way everything is playing out. The more upset, the more absurd, the more threatening of nukes and bluster and bombast, it's impotence, it's irrelevance, and Russia's victory here, it is irrevocable, it is implacable, it is happening. The Pentagon called Russia's advance a lava flow. You can't stop it. It's measured, it's slow, but there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Right. Yes. There's no shovels or anything like that, Mark. Those
Russia's got all the
Russian
shovels. Right? Russian shovels are the best shovels in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Just forget the
washing machines or something.
Shovels, right? Powered by washing machines.
Yep. All right, everybody. Well, you heard the man. Hit the like button before you go. All the links in the video description. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern time, August 3rd. Brian Berletic, KJ No. Save the date. Take care. Good night.